Welcome to another episode of In Trend, where we explore the trends, challenges, and insights shaping today's insurance landscape. In this episode, we're taking a closer look at liquor liability, a topic that continues to grow in importance for bars, restaurants, event venues, and the insurance professionals who support them. Joining us today is Patrick Riley, an attorney with more than 20 years of litigation experience. He is a member of his firm's casualty department and co-chair of the Hospitality and Liquor Liability Practice Group, where he has spent over a decade representing bars, restaurants, and hospitality businesses. His experience defending negligence and liability claims provides valuable insight into how these cases develop and how businesses can better manage their risk. Please note that this episode includes discussion of alcohol consumption, intoxication, and substance use, which some listeners may find sensitive. This conversation is intended for informational purposes only, and a full disclaimer can be found in the episode description. With that, let's dive into today's conversation. Patrick, hi. Thank you for joining us today.
Oh yeah, no, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
This is fun doing a virtual episode. I'm looking forward to it. And we're here to talk about liquor liability. So
Yeah.
thank you for joining us. What is liquor liability and why are we talking about it?
Yeah, we are here to talk about liquor liability. So when we talk about liquor liability, you might hear it also referenced as dram shop liability. That's sort of the old school way of describing it. Liquor liability or dram shop liability. What we're talking about are claims for personal injury that arise out of the service of alcohol to patrons. So either the service of alcohol to a visibly intoxicated patron or the service of alcohol to a minor. When that results in physical injury, then somebody can file a personal injury claim or a personal injury lawsuit. And those are liquor liability claims.
Yeah, everybody can relate to liquor liability. We've all driven past bars and restaurants. We've sat in them. We've dined, and you know that that risk is a real one. What are some of the prominent exposures that a bar owner might face?
Yeah, so it's funny in this area of the law, we do reference a lot of time as attorneys that this is something that juries understand and get. Liquor liability isn't like complex product liability when you're trying to figure out, what went wrong in the machine to cause it to explode. Those are things where experts need to really educate the jury on really minute scientific concepts. Most people have encountered those that have had too much to drink, and most people have encountered those that have drank before they're supposed to. And so these are, like you said, these are concepts that people are familiar with going in, which actually is an advantage for the attorneys litigating this, because we can just put it in front of the jury and we don't have to do as much educating, but the common sort of themes we see are what you'd expect when there's alcohol involved. So most frequently, what we're dealing with in terms of liquor liability claims are motor vehicle accidents. So I've seen single car motor vehicle accidents where somebody will wreck their car into a tree. Multi-car motor vehicle accidents, sort of the hallmark liquor liability or dram shop scenario is where you have somebody that's been at a bar, they've been overserved, they've had too much to drink, served alcohol while visibly intoxicated, and then they get on the road and they cross the center line and strike head on an innocent party. When we talk about why dram shop and liquor liability exists, I wasn't there when it was started, but I suspect that's the harm that they were truly trying to prevent is innocent people, getting harmed by somebody else's overconsumption or their consumption when they shouldn't be served. And so, so that's the most frequent, but this body of law also allows for lawsuits for fall downs. Somebody's too intoxicated and they fall down. It uh, provides for recovery with assault cases. Somebody has too much alcohol and gets into a fight, somebody has too much alcohol and assaults somebody. Those are the main areas we see. And we sort of divide them into two different categories. We have our first party case and our third party case. The first party case is when the customer themselves gets injured by the over service of alcohol or by the service of alcohol when they're too young. And then the third party case is when that alleged intoxicated patron, we call them the AIP, causes injury to somebody else. And here in Pennsylvania, I'm in Pittsburgh, by the way. Here in Pennsylvania, you can have a lawsuit filed by either a third party or a first party. And it's that way in a number of different jurisdictions. There are jurisdictions that say, hey, look, the first party, the customer themselves, that's not what this law is designed to protect, and they can't file a claim. But more often than not, they can.
There's a lot to unpack there, and thank you
Yeah.
for sharing that. Has it gotten easier to mitigate some of this risk with rideshare apps? And are you noticing any trends in terms of an increase in claims or hopefully a decrease?
Yeah. So a couple of things. First of all, the rideshare thing is really, really interesting in terms of how it affects the litigation. And one thing I can say is that the generation now, I guess my generation would be someone you'd frequently see on juries. And we grew up with things like Mothers Against Drunk Driving and Students Against Drunk Driving. So like MAD and SAD, we are predisposed to not cut people breaks, that were educated on the dangers of drunk driving from the time that we were in grade school and high school. Friends don't let friends drive drunk. I remember that commercial from probably when I was 10 years old. And so the fact that you can now, in mostly in the urban areas at least, get home with a push of a button, means that juries sometimes are less forgiving of the actual drunk driver, the AIP, because there are ways to prevent this. Now, uh, what that means in terms of sort of a big picture on the existence of these claims, we do see them less in urban areas now, because the more sort of sophisticated bar culture, in terms of when you're downtown and you can walk home, you can call an Uber, somebody can get you a ride right away. We have less incidents, we have less claims out in the more rural areas where those options aren't available, and where also you're typically dealing with more difficult terrain, and with alcohol, you're driving it at night a lot of the time. Um, we see a much greater likelihood, the further you get from city center, of claims and, in difficult accidents. And so this kind of feeds into, you had asked about trends. Um, Over the past couple of years now, we're seeing a spike in claims, but that might just be compared to the years when people were on lockdown, and due to COVID, people weren't going out as much. They were still drinking alcohol, but a lot of times it was to go alcohol that people were consuming in their own home. And it just makes sense that that's safer in certain ways, because, yeah, you think of the risks you eliminate when you consume alcohol in your own home, which driving is the biggest one. But also, you don't interact with as many people. So there aren't altercations, there are less altercations, less bar fights, less assaults. There are also less fall downs. All the things that can come with consuming alcohol, off, out of your home, out and about. We saw less, and since the statute of limitations is 2 years on these claims typically, so our filings usually run about 2 years behind when incidents happen, or up to 2 years behind. And so here in 2026, we're back in full swing. And there's a significant uptick in claims that I think we can just attribute to people being back out and about.
Yeah, a return to normalcy, right? The people out
Yeah.
waiting in lines, but did I hear you right? Did you say that to-go alcohol actually lessened the risk? That's
Yeah, right, and that's interesting because it's something that forever we were, I think, in this industry afraid of. The idea of taking, for example, a mixed cocktail and then getting in your car, something about that just seems totally wrong, right? It
right.
seems to go against whatever whatever we've been taught, but in reality, um, if you think about it a couple ways, first, uh, we're trusting that people weren't gonna put a little sticker on top of the mixed drink, right? You're not supposed to take it off till you get home and you drink it at home. And I think for the most part, people did that. Given all that was going on, you weren't gonna get yourself pulled over for an open container violation. It just made sense to follow the rules and to take it home. The other thing, even if you did consume it in the parking lot, alcohol is not absorbed instantly. And so you probably didn't have a lot of places to go. So if you got home before it was really, absorbed and started getting metabolized, then you were home safe. And so I actually did an article about this for the Legal Intelligencer, which is a newspaper here in Western PA. But it does seem like that it wound up being safer. I mean, we saw significantly less claims, and I can't think of one claim that I encountered where somebody had brought home take home alcohol from a bar or restaurant. It's still is primarily when you have the on premises consumption, primarily that you see the claims.
That leads me right into my next thought that was, I guess I never thought of it that way. The risk is when you're sitting in the same spot for a long period of time probably, right? Ordering a
Yeah.
second, third, and potentially a fifth drink. That's when things start to get dangerous for a bar owner. So, could
Yeah.
you walk us through a little bit about what is the burden of the person that's providing the alcohol? What are things that they look for, and what have you seen in your experience?
Yeah. So there's first of all, you think of alcohol, it is incredibly heavily regulated. When you look at, and usually it's by state law. So state to state, the laws, the regulations, they'll all change. Each state will generally have a liquor code, and that liquor code will dictate basically everything you can do and everything you can't do. Where you can buy alcohol, who you can buy it from, who you can sell it to, when you can open, when you can close, what signs you have to have, what receipts you need to keep. All of these things are heavily regulated. But in terms of what can lead to a lawsuit for personal injury, which would then implicate insurance coverage, et cetera, that type of claim arises generally out of one of two scenarios. One is the service of alcohol to a visibly intoxicated patron, and the other is service of alcohol to a minor. And so the burden on the bar or restaurant, and this does tie right into that theme of it being more, sort of risky, right? To have somebody sitting there in front of you, because the burden for a bartender or a server is at the time of service, was that person visibly intoxicated? Should that person have been cut off? And if they should have been cut off and you don't cut them off, that's when you can be liable for, the personal injury that might result. And so that's the burden. Each time you serve a drink, your bartender, your server is to be making a determination of whether the customer is fit to have another drink.
If we could get into the latter there, underserving a minor is pretty straightforward. You
Yeah.
check their ID, you scan it, make sure it's legitimate, and then you proceed. But you and I probably both know, I have some friends I could think of that you can tell when they've had 1 light beer, and
Yeah.
then there's some friends that may have had 6, and you can hardly tell.
Yeah.
How does someone understand it?
It's difficult. So first I'll start with sort of the premise that it's an imperfect science. No matter what you do, it's difficult. And the reason it's difficult is because each person will have a particularized tolerance level that Some of it is just innate to who they are, and some of it is learned from their past behavior. And so, if you have somebody who has been who started drinking when they were younger, if you have someone that drinks more frequently, then the amount it doesn't necessarily affect how your blood alcohol content rises, right? So you and I can have the same number of beers if we're the same size. Our blood alcohol content's going to be roughly similar, subject to any peculiarities in metabolism. But what will change is how your body reacts to that blood alcohol content. And we find that people who are more seasoned drinkers, their body will tolerate higher blood alcohol content without demonstrating any sort of signs of visible intoxication. And so, yeah, everybody's different. And you start different, but then the way you live makes you even more different. And so, we are asking a lot of bartenders and servers. Look, there's even case law out there that discusses like, police are heavily trained to be able to identify signs of visible intoxication, and it's even difficult for them, you know? So when we're talking about bartenders, servers, some folks, this is their, profession. And some folks, they view this type of work as like a summer job. So what's incumbent upon the bar owners and the restaurant owners is to make sure that anyone who's serving alcohol in your establishment has as much training as they possibly can. And so here in PA, we're talking typically about RAMP, which is Responsible Alcohol Management Program, or AMP. Other names for this type of training are TIPS or Safe Serve. And look, generally at this point, people can get their bartenders and servers trained online. Sometimes there are still in-person classes, but either way, what those classes will teach you is to the best of our ability, demonstrating what the signs of visible intoxication are. So, like you said, minor, it's easy. They're either 21 or they're not, right? And so, if they're 21, they can have alcohol. If they're 20 and 364 days, they cannot, right? And not until midnight. So, you can't serve a minor. It's more complicated with visible intoxication, but they do teach you the signs of visible intoxication that you're supposed to be looking for as part of that training.
Does part of that training include other substances as well? Because I imagine the burden still falls on the server
Right.
if somebody were to be intoxicated with another substance. How does that
Right. Yeah, so it's difficult. Like, when I think back to when I first started this type of litigation, so that's like 20 years ago now. It goes quick. But when I first started doing this, eh, the idea that an AIP, an alleged intoxicated patron, if they were intoxicated by substances other than alcohol, that was a really big deal in the case. And it gave the defendant a strong causation argument to say, look, this accident, it was likely caused by these illegal street drugs that you were using, right? And not the alcohol. And so that was always a really effective argument for us. What I do see somewhat, however, is the erosion of that stigma that, again, my generation and older generations may have had with respect to other intoxicants. So things like THC, things like lion's mane extract, things that you historically would view as being illegal are now significantly decriminalized or even legalized. And so the idea of a bar defending themselves previously by saying, look, how are we supposed to know someone's doing something illegal? Right? That can't be on us. And we made strong arguments in that regard. But it is eroding a bit now that all these things are legal. It feels, and there's not a ton of case law on this, but it feels as if the pressure is being placed on bartenders and servers now, uh, to be able to determine not only if someone's drunk, but if somebody's high. Intoxicated means intoxicated. So you cannot serve alcohol to somebody who's visibly intoxicated. It doesn't matter what they're intoxicated by, at least by the language of the statute. So, yeah, it's a difficult burden, and I'm sure that our trainers are touching on this, but uh, this whole area is sort of developing in front of us as we speak, and so it is an area where bartenders and servers need to do their best, but we are asking a lot of them to determine, not only now if somebody's drunk, because if someone's intoxicated by alcohol, usually it's because they've been sitting in front of you for a period of time, right? And you can count how many drinks they've had. It's not because they ate a dummy in the parking lot, right? So yeah, it's becoming perhaps more difficult for bartenders and servers.
What a delicate thank you for that answer. What a delicate situation, bar owners, hospitality are in because by its nature, you want people to stay
Yeah,
and order wings and stay for the whole game.
yeah.
But in doing so, the risk is going up as consumption goes up. So it's awfully difficult. How important is it for them to have insurance and the right plan?
So critical, right? Critical. If you wanna keep your business, then you need to have it. You need to have it insured. And part of that is, look, y- these lines are so fine. A lot of times you can do everything right. At least believe you're doing everything right and doing your best. And there are inherent risks to alcohol, and so things can still happen. And whether should be responsible or shouldn't be responsible, that doesn't mean you're not going to see a claim. And so sometimes seeing a claim is, as bad as actually doing something wrong, in that the cost to the business, even of defending a lawsuit like this, can be staggering. So we estimate to the insurance carrier, um, a cost of defending a case between 100 and $150,000. If you want to go all the way through trial and you want to have competent experts, we want our claims folks to know at the outset this is what it could cost to get this case to a verdict. Now, your standard bar or restaurant that, look, if they didn't buy liquor liability insurance, it's probably because it was too expensive. And now they're going to make, you want to know what too expensive is. Well, really, too expensive is the 100 to $150,000 that it would cost to defend the case. And it's actually, it can be prohibitively expensive, to a bar restaurant to defend one of these claims. And so, yeah, insurance is absolutely critical. Particularly if you want your business to survive. One other note on that, at least in Pennsylvania, and it's similar, in many other jurisdictions. In Pennsylvania, your bartender and your server can actually be sued personally, under our Dram Shop Act. It's not just the business that's sued, and so operating without insurance, um, not only does it leave the business exposed, but it can leave your bartenders and your waitresses personally, exposed as well, as they're likely not independently wealthy to the point where they can afford to defend a case through trial either.
You mean personal assets
Yes.
serving?
Yeah. Personal assets for a bartender and server can be at risk. That's not something that we see practically happening a lot. We don't see plaintiffs' attorneys pursuing that angle. But like I said, there's two real benefits that come from an insurance contract. There's the indemnity, and then there's the cost of defense. And so, again, it can be prohibitively expensive for an individual to defend themselves, if they're working somewhere that doesn't have liquor liability coverage, and if they get personally sued.
I like that you use the word respect. I think I've heard that a few times today. I think that's a huge takeaway for listeners when it comes to the topic. How important
Yeah.
is you respect?
Yeah. That's that's I speak for USLI a good bit on the safe service of alcohol, sort of a trade-off. Look, I have a really unique perspective, given that we defend these lawsuits. So once something gets to my desk, something's already gone wrong. And so we're often looking back in hindsight. How could we have prevented this? What could we do better? What are the takeaways that I can kind of go out on the road and tell insureds in order to, twofold. One is to help insureds defend themselves from claims, but perhaps more importantly is making sure that as few of these incidents happen as possible, right? We can't necessarily eliminate all risk with alcohol, but we want to make sure people are educated and do their best. And so part of that is respecting uh, the gravity of what can happen with intoxication. And so not to be too much of a downer here, but when we talk about respecting what alcohol can do, the amount of harm that can be caused is catastrophic. So anything from fatalities to paralysis to lifelong permanent injuries. I mean, we see that frequently with the type of motor vehicle accidents that arise out of the service of alcohol, and that's why again, some people this is a summer job. Some people it's more their profession. I've used the term in the past vocation. I've been told that might be a little over the top. But we do that to drive home the point that this is serious work, right? And if you don't take it seriously and you don't respect the power that alcohol can have over people, then it can lead to some fairly catastrophic results.
I like the way you put that. It's as serious as it gets.
Yeah, for sure.
What might the future hold for liquor liability?
Oh, yeah. So it's interesting. Like I mentioned to you earlier, we're seeing a little bit of an uptick in our claims. We're busier now than we should. And I think that's two things. One, I think again, now that we're back post lockout, I think we are seeing more people out enjoying themselves, but then also the offshoot of that is we're having some more incidents with respect to alcohol. But I don't think it's just that there's more incidents. I think there's also a higher knowledge level right now about dram shop and about liquor liability than perhaps we've seen in the past. When I first started doing this work, the way I got into it was the first lawyer I worked for was helping USLI defend liquor liability cases all over the country. And so when you just start as a young lawyer, you often do what the lawyer you're working for does. And so that's how I started defending liquor cases for USLI again, like that's 20 years ago. Now, but at that time, if somebody asked what I did, I would say dram shop and they'd say, what is that? What is dram shop? And I'd say liquor liability. And they say, wait a second. So you can sue a bar for serving you alcohol? And I would say, yeah. And people were really, taken aback by that. And so fast forward to last summer on the cover of the Philly Inquirer, there was a big story about dram shop liability, liquor liability, and the potential for some significant verdicts as a result of it. And I just that's just an anecdotal sort of note, but I think that people are becoming more aware that this is out there. So, what do I see for the future? I see an uptick in a continued uptick in perhaps not in the number of incidents, but in the number of incidents that result in a claim. I think that's moving towards a higher percentage of the incidents resulting in claims. There's also, as you mentioned earlier, uh, the involvement of other intoxicants now, and mostly it's THC, being decriminalized, being legalized. And so we're waiting a bit for that law to develop. But certainly it's going to play a role in the future of liquor liability. Um, in part because we're seeing, particularly with younger generations, we're seeing that more involved in how people live their recreational life, right? And so when you look at who's in the bars and what they're doing, There's more THC around now, it would seem, than there was in the past.
I think you're right on. I think statistics support that too. I think
Yeah.
the alcohol consumption culture has changed. Um, looks a little
Yeah.
different.
Yeah, it does. And look, and in some ways it's a good thing, right? In some ways, people are being more responsible in their amount of consumption, but in some ways, it's even more challenging now for this industry, right? That you're not dealing just again with beer or liquor that you've served and can observe and can manage, right? It can be more challenging, particularly those other intoxicants being involved.
I appreciate that answer and I appreciate your time. You're a wealth of knowledge. I think this is an important conversation and ones that listeners will enjoy listening to.
Mm.
In parting, would you leave us with some wisdom or things to remember on the topic, things to leave with?
Yeah, sure. So I will leave you with the two things I'm often asked: what's one thing a bar should never do, right? And I always give two answers, despite always being asked for one thing. And look, whether you're a bar, a restaurant, or whether you're just having a party on your deck, um, all you can drink alcohol and serve yourself alcohol are the two most risky things that we see in the industry. And so, our largest verdict here in Western PA for the longest time was a result of an all-you-can-drink ticket. Served it with the words "all you can drink" on it, and then folks that weren't monitoring the pouring of the alcohol. People were pouring their own alcohol. So bars and restaurants, just take seriously your responsibility to um, yeah, apprise somebody's condition every time they order a drink. And if you're doing that, you're doing your best, and you're minimizing the risk of one of these incidents. You can never bring it fully down to zero, but you should be doing your best in terms of training, in terms of proper staffing, to make sure that as best we can, we're not serving alcohol to visibly intoxicated patrons.
Thank you. I appreciate your time, Patrick.
No, thank you guys so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. To our listeners, we'll see you next time on In Trend.